Hello. On behalf of the Rockefeller Center, welcome to tonight's Rocky Watch event. Tina Nadeau, Chief Justice of the New Hampshire Superior Court, will deliver the 2021 Perkins Bass Distinguished Lecture about drug court in the state of New Hampshire. This event will be hosted by Ronald Scheiko, Senior Fellow and Associate Director of the Rockefeller Center. Before we get started, a couple of Zoom details. You may ask your questions at any time using the Q&A button. To access Zoom's closed captioning feature, navigate to the live transcript button and select Show Subtitle. If you don't see that option, look under the button that says More. There will be a slideshow tonight. To see both the slide and the speaker, find the View Options button and click on side-by-side mode. You can change the side of the slides by hovering your pointer over the line dividing the PowerPoint and Judge Nadeau. You can drag that to change the size of the slides. Finally, when you leave tonight's webinar, you will see a 3-question survey. We would be very grateful if you could take the time to answer the 3 brief questions. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our host for the evening, the Associate Director of the Rockefeller Center, Ron Scheiko.
Thank you, Joanne. Appreciate it. It is indeed my great pleasure to introduce Chief Justice Tina Nadeau for the New Hampshire Superior Court. She is joining us as the Perkins Bass Distinguished Lecturer. She will be a visitor on campus for the entire 2021 calendar year, and I hope to have her in class in the fall as we discuss issues relating to New Hampshire politics and policy. But today, the Perkins Bass Lectureship has been around since 2014. It is an honor given to a New Hampshire citizen who is currently or has in the past displayed exemplary service to the state of New Hampshire. Past recipients have been Governor John Lynch, Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, John Broderick, Speaker of the House, Terry Norelli, and former Senator and former Attorney General Kelly Ayotte. So you join quite an august crowd, and thank you for joining us. As Joanne said, Judge Nadeau will present her talk, and then I'll come back, ask the judge a few questions, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So thanks for coming. We appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ron. And it really is a pleasure to be here with all of you, and such an honor to receive this award. I know there have been many incredibly distinguished members of New Hampshire who have come before me. So I am going to take this opportunity to share my screen so I can, great. I think that works. So what I am excited about talking with you today about is drug court. It's an approach to dealing with offenders who commit crimes, felonies, and who are suffering from substance use disorder. And it's not new in the country, but it is fairly new in New Hampshire. There are about 3,000 drug courts around the country. And what's really important to know about them is that we have spent decades trying to deal with substance use disorder in our criminal justice system by putting people in jail and prison. And, sitting on the Superior Court as a judge, I would see the same people coming to my court time and time again, facing the same problems and facing escalating sanctions and trying to figure out what are we doing that's not working here. So drug court is an approach that we use. Oh, you know what? I am going to share in a different way. Hold on. Okay. Give me 1 minute. Slideshow from beginning. There we go. Okay. So we want to talk about why drug court. Why do we use drug court? And in order to understand that, you really need to understand what is it like for a Superior Court judge in a courtroom without drug court. And let me tell you what would happen. I'm going to give you an example of someone who comes to our court, an actual example. And we'll talk about Tracy. That's not her real name, obviously, but she is a 35-year-old woman with 3 children, all of whom are in the care of the Division of Children, Youth, and Families. She's been using drugs since the age of 13, when her mother, who was also addicted to cocaine, provided her with her first hit. And that is not unusual. The folks we see in drug court have been using since they were teenagers, often when their parents have introduced them to the drug. She returned to heroin at age 20. Her mother was an alcoholic and addicted to cocaine. Her brother was in prison for possession of heroin. Her father died when she was young. She tried intensive outpatient treatment for heroin 3 times, but she failed each time. She has overdosed 10 times, and this is an actual case. She's entered detox repeatedly, but never completed it. She's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, PTSD, and anxiety. All of it was not treated before she landed in criminal court. Her housing and transportation are unstable. She did obtain her GED when she was 20, but her ability to maintain a job is challenging. So the criminal justice system began getting involved in her life, and her history started at age 22 with some minor misdemeanor and drug possession charges. She has 56 convictions with 15 periods of incarceration. And as her criminal conduct escalated, it started with felony with possession, and then it escalated to felony forgery, theft, credit card fraud, and all of those offenses were committed to support her substance use disorder. And so the criminal justice response escalated. So what do we do on the first offense? It's the first time we see her in criminal court, but obviously she's had a lifetime of challenges before then. So the state would say, Judge, let's give this person a chance. Let's put them on probation and let's order them to go get treatment. And if anybody knows anything about substance use disorder, you will understand that someone who's been suffering from this disorder will not march off to the Farnham Center on their own and say, sign me up for treatment. It doesn't happen. So obviously the person continues to use, continues to commit crime. And on the second offense, the state may argue, Judge, we gave her a chance. It's time for her to spend some time at the House of Corrections. So let's give her 3 months at the House of Corrections and a more stern order for treatment on probation. So she is released, she's on probation. Again, she continues to use because we aren't addressing the underlying conviction. By the third offense, the state is asking for 12 months at the House of Corrections. And by the fourth offense, they want 2 to 4 years at the state prison. And that's when I stopped myself and I said to the prosecutor, I have seen this person now going on their 4th time. And every time we've increased jail time, now you're recommending she be sent to state prison. What is it about jail that you think is working? Because it's not. So what do we know about crime in our state? And let me say, obviously, there are offenders that belong in state prison. There are dangerous offenders. But what you need to know is that 80% of the people we see actually in our courts are using drugs or alcohol. And you can see from these statistics that most of the folks we see are struggling with substance use disorder. They are committing new crimes after they're released from jail or prison because jail or prison doesn't address the underlying problem that forms the basis for their crime. So take a look at this statistic. This chart tells you about people who are suffering from mental health problems, serious mental health problems, substance use disorders. The green is the general population, and the gray and orange are state prisons and local jails. So a disproportionate number of people are in our jails and prisons. And that's where we are asking, we're asking our superintendents to deal with substance use disorder and mental health issues, and they go hand in hand. So we need a different approach. Let me tell you, in our country, we have the highest incarceration rate of any other country on the planet, 5 times the worldwide average. We come, a distant second is either Korea or China, depending on which statistic you're looking at. And what we spend on treatment and intervention is insufficient. So for every $100 that a state government spends on substance use disorder, about $2.38 is spent on treatment and prevention. Now, sometimes people will say to me, when I talk about drug courts and talk about a different approach, they say, well, these folks are choosing to use substances. So why should we use our tax dollars to help them? And I have a couple of answers to that. First of all, when we're talking about choice, and some of you may know this already, and you will see it from a couple of slides that I have here, that when people use substances, the chemistry of their brain literally changes. And we know now that substance use disorder is a chronic, relapsing, physiological condition. It's a complicated condition. There are people who have incredible willpower that cannot stop using. And a second thing I would say about choice is we know, and hopefully there aren't some of you in the audience, that people choose to smoke cigarettes, and we don't turn them away from hospitals when they are struggling with cancer. And then the final thing I'll say is, especially for opioid use disorder, people who use, say, heroin for the first time, that can be enough to trigger a pretty significant addiction. So let's talk about the drug court model. One thing you need to know about drug court is that it is more successful at reducing crime. If you send someone to jail or prison for a year or 2 years, when they come out, they're likely to reoffend at a rate of around 69%. And when they graduate from drug court, the same profile offender, they spend a year and a half, maybe 2 years in drug court, they reoffend at a rate of 25 or 30%. So really sending people to jail or prison is not a great return on investment. I was at a training a while back, and the presenter said to me, if jails or prisons changed behavior, they would be empty, and they're not. Drug court also costs a lot less, as you can see, and drug court is one of the most empirically studied criminal justice reforms in the country. The way we conduct drug court has been studied for 20 years. And the way they are studied is they take a comparison group of offenders who have the same profile that go through state prison, and then a group of offenders that go through drug court. And they compare what are the elements of drug court that actually work to change behavior, which is what we're trying to accomplish here. And what we really want to do is to return offenders to the community as contributing members. I'll tell you about some of my process in drug court, but I usually ask participants when I see them in court, tell me something positive that's happened for you this week, because people don't ask them that. And one offender said to me, this week I was able to pay my income taxes. And I thought, who thinks paying income taxes is a positive thing? But this person said, the first time that I've been able to get a job that's above board, above the table, I have been able to pay income taxes. And I feel better. I feel like I have purpose. It motivates me to continue with this behavior. And that's what we want to see in drug court. So how does it work exactly? You probably have seen on, Law and Order or any other criminal justice program that the traditional approach to crime and punishment is for prosecutor and defense attorney to be in court, arguing about whether the judge should impose a state prison sentence or a fully suspended sentence with probation. And the judge really doesn't have a whole lot of options. But for drug court, we all act as a team. So we have the same judge, the same prosecutor, the same defense attorney, the same treatment provider, the same probation officer, the same case manager. We all meet together. We go to training together, if you can believe it. We all have to sort of change our old ways of thinking and think about solving this problem of substance use disorder and crime in a different way. And, when I remember when I went to a training one time, it was a week-long training where we all went together, and we actually spent probably a half an hour arguing about whether or not we should call a positive drug test dirty or positive. And of course, law enforcement was arguing, just call it what it is. And treatment was arguing, if you call it dirty, then the person is going to feel dirty and they won't feel motivated to change. So even down to the language we used, we all had to step out of our old roles of advocacy and think about problem solving together. And I never believed I'd be sitting across a table from a treatment provider deciding what to do in the courtroom an hour later. So defendants are identified early, pretty soon after arrest. We use what's called an evidence-based risk assessment tool so that we can figure out the right people to put in drug court, because contrary to what a layperson might think, not every single person who's involved in drug-related crime belongs in drug court. So the evidence-based assessment allows us to determine, do they have a very significant substance use disorder And are they high risk for reoffending? So that actually is the category of offender we're looking at. It is not the first time offender. It's not the person who can probably put one foot in front of the other. It's not a way to divert them out of the criminal justice system to give them a chance. It's really taking the offender who's got a criminal record, has felonies on their record, has tried and failed at treatment before, has started using drugs very early on as a teenager, maybe even, and has very difficult family circumstances. So somebody that would otherwise be headed to state prison because we haven't addressed the underlying problem. And so we identify the person as high risk, high need, and they enter a plea. So they actually plead guilty. They agree to the offenses. It may be burglary, it could be robbery, it could be credit card fraud. As long as it's related to their substance use disorder, then they qualify for drug court. And they enter a plea of guilty, and they receive a fully suspended state prison sentence and 3 years of probation. And the first year and a half of probation is spent attending drug court. And so what are the participant obligations? They are required, once they've entered their plea, to appear in court weekly and have a conversation with the judge about how they're doing. They are in treatment, group treatment, 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. And sometimes their assessment might indicate that they need residential treatment first and then intensive outpatient. They also get individual treatment 1 time a week. There are recovery support activities, sometimes like AA or NA or sober type of activities as well. They get case management services at least once a week. They are random drug tested twice a week, and it's purely random. They have an equal chance of getting called in for their drug test 7 days a week. You can't accept weekends. And I'll tell you why that is. On regular probation, a defendant may show up at probation, and the probation officer will say, all right, let's get you involved in supervision, and you will be required to show up every other Wednesday to get a drug test. And to me, that's not a drug test, that's an IQ test, because folks who are suffering from substance use disorder are going to learn how to use around a predictable test. When you learn about substance use disorder, you learn that it is a compulsive disease, a compulsive condition, and that people engage in this risky behavior, even though it means they lose their job, they lose their family, they lose their homes. The brain is so triggered to use the substances that they lose everything else in their lives. So in drug court, they have to call a telephone every day. And if their color comes up, red, blue, green, they have to report and get tested. They are regularly reporting to probation. They have random home visits. In later phases, when they're more stable, they're required to get a job, GED, or pay restitution. And I'm just going to say something about graduation rates. Sometimes legislators will ask me, tell me about your graduation rate. If you are a good drug court, you probably have close to 100% of a graduation rate. And that's actually not true. A good drug court gets a graduation rate at about 60%. And that's because we are taking really the toughest cases. If we cherry picked and we took the easy cases where nobody ever struggled, nobody ever used the whole time they were in drug court, we would be taking the wrong people. And in fact, the studies show that if you take somebody who's really not at high risk for reoffending and you mix them with this group, you are going to make them worse. So we stay very focused on which people will do best in drug court. So what we do at these team meetings, the team will meet, say for example, in Stratford County, there are about 70 people involved in drug court. They don't all come every week because they are in different phases of the program. So people in phase 1 will come every week, and that might be about 20 or 26 people that show up for the week. And the team will meet for a couple of hours beforehand in the morning, and we review the progress of every participant that week. We review their behavior, we review their treatment goals, we talk about whether or not they're progressing, we talk about did they have some huge challenge in their lives that week that caused them to have a flare-up in their use, and how can we adjust their treatment. And we talk to them about distal goals and proximal goals. Proximal goals are things they can do easily right now. Distal goals are things that take a very long time. So somebody who enters drug court, they cannot stop using just because we tell them to. But what they can do right away is show up to everything we tell them to and be honest, even though it's really hard for them to be honest. They're not used to being honest in the criminal justice system because it always gets them in trouble. And what we try to teach them is we want a trusting relationship with them. We want to help them when they're struggling. And the only way we can do that is for them to be honest with them. So we treat their sick behavior. We don't punish it. And we reward their behavior that we want to continue. So one of the things we learn in drug court training is that for every negative thing you say to a participant, you need to give them 4 incentives. You need to either talk positively about how they're doing well. You need to give them some applause. You need to maybe even they earn a gift card or a gas card. And I remember trying to talk to one of my colleagues who was not a drug court judge, and she didn't understand this 4-to-1 ratio. I'm supposed to say 4 positive things for every 1 negative thing. And she said to me, all right, how about if I pick 1 positive thing and say it 4 times? And no, that does not count. But what is important is that for the high-risk, high-need offender, they actually do better when you incentivize the behavior that you want to see repeated. We do have to use sanctions because sometimes people abscond, they flee because they're scared about this program. They may tamper with their drug sample. I don't know, hopefully none of you have heard of a Wizinator, but actually this is something they can purchase online. It looks like a real body part and it delivers a drug-free sample during their testing. So what we try to do is incentivize their behavior that we want to see. And for example, when I'm in court, I use sort of motivational interviewing techniques. I'm used to ordering people to do things and having them do them, and that doesn't work. What you need to do is find out what motivates them. Sometimes the motivation is to stay out of jail. Sometimes the motivation is to get their kids back. Sometimes the motivation is to be sober and live a productive life. And so you want to talk to them about how is that going? Tell me about how you did this week in treatment. What was easy? What was hard? Tell me something positive about yourself. I have said that to many participants who have said, I can't think of a thing, because they've never had anybody ask that about them. Their families have said to them over and over, you're not worth anything. And so for them to hear someone in a position of authority wants to know how they're doing, it really does motivate them to work on their behavior. So this is what we are doing in drug court. We're trying to modify their behavior. We use in treatment cognitive behavioral therapy, which is show them how to behave, let them practice it, correct them when they're wrong. It's very action oriented. They have homework assignments that they have to turn in. They have to practice how they deal with a boss at work. They have to practice how they deal with old friends trying to come sell them drugs or get them to use drugs just this one more time. And studies have actually shown that sort of scare tactics and education and talk therapy alone does not work. So, when we're talking about this, we're talking about sort of that criminal thinking that a lot of the people we've seen have been used to for their whole lives, for them to survive in their homelessness or their lack of financial support. They've used a lot of criminal thinking. They minimize their poor choices. They blame other people. They feel they're the victims. And we are trying to get them to change that way of thinking. And that will in turn help them change their choices around substance use disorder. So this chart, it always fascinates me. You'll see at the top there, that's a normal brain lighting up. The second line is someone who uses cocaine after 10 days of abstinence. And then the bottom row is someone who uses cocaine after 100 days of abstinence. So you can see, we can actually look at MRIs now and see that the brain is damaged from years of substance use. And even by 100 days of abstinence, the brain is still not fully healed. And as you can imagine, in the first weeks of drug court, we just want to stabilize them. They can't use their brains to figure out how to engage in treatment. We just need to stabilize them. All right, so Ron, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I am.
All right, I'm going to test you.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want you to do is I'm going to tell you when to start, and I want you to read the words horizontally as fast as you can. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right, go.
blue, red, yellow, orange, green, blue, purple, red, purple, yellow, red, blue, orange, blue, yellow, red, red, green, orange, blue, purple, yellow, blue, orange.
Okay, perfect. Now on the next screen, don't start till I tell you, I want you not to read the text, just say the color and do the same thing horizontally when I say go. Are you ready?
Just say that again.
Say the color.
I'm saying
and
the
not
color.
Yes.
Without, okay.
Ready, go.
Green, purple, yellow, red, yellow, red, blue, green, red, green, yellow, red, green, yellow, pink or purple, blue, blue, purple, orange, yellow, yellow, blue, yellow, green.
Excellent. All right. Excellent job. So the reason I had you do that is to show you that it took you 9 seconds to read the first chart and 25 seconds to read the second chart. And what that shows you is that it's really hard to change the way your brain has been trained. Our brains have been trained to read text and not color when we're looking at words. Now, it doesn't mean we can't change our brains. It just means it takes a lot of concentration. It would take a lot of practice to be able to read this chart in the same amount of time that it takes to read the first chart. And so when we're talking about people in drug court, we are asking them to change absolutely everything, to eventually stop using drugs, not right away, to stop hanging out with people that are not good for them, to try to gain some life skills, to engage in treatment, to show up for their drug tests, to talk with their case manager about housing, to eventually get their GED. And all those things are overwhelming, which is why it takes a couple of years to get through drug court. So in New Hampshire, we had our first felony drug court, maybe 15, 20 years ago in Stratford County. And it started with just a little pilot project with some federal funding. And then Grafton County followed suit. And then when I started on the bench, I was in Rockingham County, and it took me 2 years to convince a group of stakeholders to just go to a training together. And then when I became chief in 2011, I got a couple of other drug courts going with some federal funding. And then in 2016, unfortunately, as a result of the opioid epidemic, the legislature agreed to fully fund drug courts in New Hampshire, and we have them operating in every county except Sullivan County. We have a drug court coordinator in our state office, and the funding is tied to the courts using evidence-based practices, which is excellent. I want to make sure I save enough time for the Q&A, but I need to say a couple of things about medication-assisted treatment. I think that this has been a sticking point for a lot of people out in the community. You know, you've heard about methadone, buprenorphine, Suboxone, and a lot of our sort of instinctual reaction is, well, that's just substituting one drug for another. And it absolutely is not. And I'm going to talk to you about a study. But basically, only 1 out of 10 people with opioid use disorder can stop using drugs with treatment alone without medication. And it's because of the chemical makeup of the brain that occurs when people use opioids. So what medication-assisted treatment does is it helps to stabilize the brain, to clear sort of the fog so that a person can actually engage in treatment. We looked at MRI results when we go to trainings, and they showed the MRI of an Alzheimer patient's brain and the MRI of someone suffering from opioid use disorder, and they looked exactly the same. So when we're talking about it is that what it really does for the participants, and I'll tell you about it, it normalizes the brain chemistry, as we talked about that. It blocks that euphoric effect on the brain. So if someone uses heroin, they get this incredible spike in euphoria. I mean, 10 times the best meal you ever had, 10 times the best sexual experience you've ever had. And so it hooks the brain on that reward system. And the medication helps relieve those cravings. It stabilizes body functions. And let me just tell you a little bit about, and here's an example. Naltrexone is Vivitrol. So people who have had traditional treatment versus people who've gotten also medication-assisted treatment, and you can see the relapse percentages here. But there was a study done in Sweden, and this is what I want to end on. They took 40 people who had suffered from substance use disorder involving opiates, and they all volunteered, so they were all highly motivated. And 20 of them got all the bells and whistles we give, all of them got all the bells and whistles we give in drug court, the cognitive behavioral therapy, the substance use treatment, the mental health treatment if they needed it, the skills treatment, intensive outpatient, everybody got all of that. 20 of them got a placebo, and the other 20 got buprenorphine, which is a medication for medication-assisted treatment. And it was a year-long study, and people had to go to the hospital every single day for the first 6 months. So that shows you how highly motivated they were and how much willpower they had. At the end of 1 year, the people who had received traditional treatment plus plus buprenorphine, almost 90% of them were still engaged in treatment. None of them had used an illicit drug. They were still engaged in work and school. Of the 20 that got the placebo, and it was double blind, so not even the providers knew, at the end of 3 months, all of them had dropped out of treatment and 4 were dead of an overdose. So medication-assisted treatment prevents overdoses, stabilizes the brain chemistry, allows people to stay engaged in treatment. And it's important for us to make sure we're including that in best practices. It used to be 15 years ago when I went to a drug court training, we couldn't talk about medication-assisted treatment. It was too controversial. And now you cannot get federal funding if you don't allow medication-assisted treatment in your program. So here's just the 2 last slides. This is a woman who was in one of our drug courts. She actually, she had all of those felonies. She lost her job. She lost her kids. She was homeless. And finally, after years of in and out of jail and prison, in and out of treatment, she ended up in drug court. As she graduated, I think 4 years ago, and she's still doing well. And she got her daughter back, and this is what she looks like now, which is pretty incredible. And here is another participant at his graduation with his granddaughter. And you can see in this next picture, his mugshot compared to where he is now. He used substances for 35 of his 50 years. His dad would take him on drug runs when he was 5 years old. No surprise, what are we doing with our kids? We're taking them to kindergarten parties and Halloween parties. And so he had a good friend that said at his graduation, I really thought the only time I would speak on behalf of Paul would be at his funeral. And here he was at his graduation. He's still doing well, although we have lost track of him. But records check shows that he is doing well. So that is it at this point. I want to make sure, hopefully I left enough time for talking with you, Ron. Thank you all for being patient with that presentation.
Yep. Well, I don't know where to start. I've got.
I'm sure there's. I could spend like 2 hours.
Let me start where you wrapped up on MAT. So in 2015, New Hampshire actually introduced medically assisted treatment into the prison system.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? Is that at least something, or?
That is, yes, that is excellent. And you bring up a good point, because some people will say to me, well, why don't we just give them treatment in the jails and prisons? That way we get both. We get to lock them up. We get to give them treatment. And so a couple of things I will say about that. It is very important and very encouraging that the jails and prisons are now connecting people with medication assistance, because if they leave jail or prison without that medication, they are at the highest risk of overdose and dying, because they have been abstinent in jail without the ability to stop their use. Then when they're released, their body is not tolerant anymore. They use their old dose and they die of overdoses. So, but what I think is important to know is that jail is not a place for treatment. And the studies will show that if you give somebody treatment in jail and they don't have the intensive follow-up like drug court in the community for at least a year or two, you are wasting your money. So it is the most expensive, least effective way of giving someone treatment. They have to practice in the community.
All right, good. All right, I want to go back to the team model. I mean, this is so different from just put on your trial court hat versus your drug court hat. The role that you play as a judge is very different. Is that can all trial judges be drug court judges?
That is a great question. And one of the best practice standards actually says you need drug court judges who volunteer.
Okay.
You can't have a drug court judge who's ordered to do a rotation in drug court, because it is completely changing your hat. And, so I made sure when I rolled this out that I had somebody who was willing and wanted to and was passionate about drug court. There are some judges that are excellent trial court judges, excellent at applying the rules of evidence, and would not want to touch drug court with a 10-foot pole, because
Right.
it's like a combination. I mean, we're not treatment providers. We can't be treatment providers, but we need to learn to speak in a different way than we have during our education or on the bench.
Yeah. I'm going to tag on former Senator Martha Hennessy's on board here tonight.
Excellent.
Question about Sullivan County, but let me expand on that. The idea of the growth of the phenomenon of drug courts, it's been since 1989, and we're now over 3,000 nationwide. But why this sort of incrementalism, or having to find money over here, go to the Justice Department, have to go to foundations? Why has it been incremental? And again, her question is, why is there no drug court in Sullivan
County? Well, so there's a couple answers to that. First of all, as you noted, it was a huge mind shift, even for judges who are willing to give this a try. So as you can imagine, in the community, it is a huge change in the way they're used to understanding crime and punishment. So as I told you, it took me a couple of years to get stakeholders together, to go to a training, to learn about drug court. It also takes a couple of years, maybe even close to 3 or 4 years, for a drug court to hit their stride, because we all slip back into our old ways of thinking. So it's been around for many years, but it is also a huge shift in the way people think about crime and punishment. So I'm not surprised that it takes an incremental approach, and you really want to make sure you get buy-in. I spent a couple of years visiting but almost every local police department to talk about drug court, to do a PowerPoint presentation, to answer their incredibly skeptical questions about why would this actually work. So building that community support, one kind of department at a time, one stakeholder at a time, and then the community buy-in as well, takes a lot of time. And as for Sullivan County, I mean, I think, we talked with some stakeholders there, and I think they do have a program in their jail that works well, and they are focused on that jail program right now. So I think someday we'll be able to convince them that a jail program and drug court can work in tandem. And I think it just takes sort of the right moment in time with the right people around the table to say, let's give it a shot. So we're not giving up yet, but they do a lot of good work there in the community as well.
Do you envision at some point where all 10 counties have state-funded drug courts that are sort of in the line items in the budget?
Yes, right now we have that in our judicial branch budget. It is a specific line item. It's drug court. It's interesting because the judicial branch doesn't really provide programming. We provide a forum for people to resolve disputes, and we provide access to justice. So drug court is an exception to that. And I think what the legislature thought was we either put this in the corrections department budget or the judicial branch budget, and it makes more sense if we're shifting to a new model to put it in the judicial branch budget. And what we do with that is we actually contract with treatment providers in each community to provide the treatment, the case management, and the drug court coordinator. So the judges and the lawyers and the probation officers kind of give their time. We don't get extra money for that. The money is purely for treatment and case management.
Right. Riley Gordon's got a question. I think you might mean prosecutors, but what is the role of state attorneys in drug court process? Do they consent to the defendants participating, or does the judge make the determination solely based on evidence-based risk assessment?
That's a really great question. And the goal is for the team to be well trained together, to understand that this is not a subjective litmus test. This is an objective test based on an objective criteria contained in a risk assessment tool. So the best drug courts make sure that all their team members, including the prosecutor, get training so they understand that. Now, we did start off many of our drug courts giving the prosecutor a veto power because that helped with the buy-in. And eventually they don't use it anymore. And sometimes, what the team has to understand is a prosecutor may know something that we don't know. They may know that a person is involved in a bigger investigation. And even though they fit the criteria, it might not be appropriate from a public safety perspective to have that person in drug court. So every team member has a voice at the table. We get trained about being objective and not subjective. And by the time the team's been together for a couple of years, they have learned to trust each other, and those decisions get made together. But there are counties where the judge will make the final decision if there's disagreement.
Okay. I think we've been talking largely, we've been using just drug treatment court, but we're talking adult. So
Yes.
talk about, so some have family drug courts and there are also mental health courts.
Yes.
Talk about the differences between those.
Sure, I definitely will. So for what I'm mostly talking about right now, what's been funded is adult felony treatment court.
Right.
Now, it's not just for people with substance use disorder. In fact, I would say almost every single one of the participants also has a co-occurring mental health disorder. So it's really important to treat those two conditions simultaneously. Even under the old treatment system, treatment providers would say, go take care of your mental health before you come to me for treatment on your drug use issues. And then mental health people would say, go get your drug issues treated before you deal with your mental health issues. And now we treat them together as a team, and the treatment providers do both. So we just started a family treatment court, which is not criminal court. So family treatment court addresses parents who are at risk of losing their children because of substance use. So that's a very similar model. We obviously don't use any jail sanctions because it's not a criminal case. We don't use many jail sanctions in the adult treatment court either, unless somebody's fleeing or absconding, or maybe they commit a new offense while they're in drug court. We try to fold it back in. And then mental health court is there. We have 16 mental health courts in New Hampshire. They are mostly in the circuit court. I'm in the Superior Court.
Okay.
And that is because most of the cases, when the predominant issue is persistent mental illness, you find it a lot in those nuisance kind of crimes where people they show up, they're loitering, they're committing small time thefts, and they have very significant mental health issues. So sometimes someone might start off in drug court and we find that they really need to be in mental health court, though drug courts deal with both mental health and substance use. And someone who's in mental health court, they may have substance use issues, but their predominant issue is mental health. So that's what the risk assessment tool helps us tease out. And there are teams that understand the difference between the two.
Good. Joan's got a question. My limited understanding is people will change when they're ready to change. Are there strategies in your program uses to externally hasten that internal change? Are there strategies shared with individuals who might influence users?
That is a really excellent question, because sometimes teams will say to me, well, this person just wants a chance to get out of prison. They're not motivated to deal with their substance use disorder. Why should they be in drug court? That's exactly the person we want in drug court. So it doesn't matter what their motivation is, you have to meet them where they are and look for that change talk. So for example, if somebody says to me, I'm going to do this drug court program because I don't want to be in prison. And then you start with that. Okay, you don't want to be in prison. How can we help you stay out of prison? Do you think using drugs is helping you stay out of prison? So we look for that change talk, and there are many levels of readiness. So there may be, I'm sure you've heard this, pre-contemplation. They're not even thinking about they've got a problem. Then there's contemplation. Maybe I have a problem, but I don't think I need to do much about it. Then there's action. Then there's commitment, and then there's sort of constant, engagement for the rest of their lives. So yes, that is the whole goal of drug court. The treatment providers actually help the other team members learn how to use that kind of language, learn how to recognize change, talk in our participants, and motivate them based on what their goals are. Somebody is motivated to get their kids back. Somebody's motivated to reestablish connections with their families, and then we focus on those and develop individual treatment plans. Somebody might need housing assistance. Not everybody needs life skills assistance. So those kinds of things targeted to what the individual person's needs are. So once they're assessed, the team will come up with a treatment plan that includes treatment, case management, life skills, all of those things.
Cool. Good. One of my colleagues, Herschel Natchez, has a question. First, as a huge fan of drug courts, thanks for all your work. A slippery slope question, though. As you know, there have been big expansions in alternative courts beyond drug courts, veterans courts, domestic violence courts, etc. some worry about a slippery slope where courts expand beyond their capacities and in too many areas of social problems, quote, in quotes, might, which they might misdefine or might exceed their expertise or authority. What do you think of the slippery slope argument about how specialized courts can and should extend?
Yes, I agree with that. In fact, one of the most important things for any court to do is to make sure they have the resources to support the mission. So if you're going to start a drug court in a county and you don't have any inpatient treatment available, then somebody who's struggling and needs that as an appropriate level of care and you don't have it, then you should not be opening a drug court. And same, with veterans, we have a couple of veterans tracks, we call them, because that is one of those difficult questions, because really it's high risk, high need, not status. I mean, if you're a veteran and you're high risk, high need, you should be in a treatment court. But if you're a veteran and you're not high risk, high need, maybe what you need is probation with connection to veteran services. So you're absolutely right. You need to assess what is the need in the community, what are the available resources, do we have the ability to go forward with the resources we have? I agree 100%.
Good. A quick question from someone who supports through their church the Grafton County Drug Court. How effective? How would you rate the Grafton County Drug Court?
Well, Grafton County they were one of our trailblazers, so they have done an excellent job, and I have to say, I give them a lot of credit because they started early on, and when drug courts started early, they started with the easy cases. They wanted to be successful. I remember a public defender used to say to me, "Judge, can we just take a pot smoking shoplifter?" Because she knew that person would be able to put one foot in front of the other. So Grafton County started that way, which they absolutely should have, because that's how you build buy-in. And then as they developed over time, they realized we need to focus on the high risk, high need offender, because that's where our resources will get the most success. And that shift was really challenging. They were open and willing. They had some technical assistance from Bureau of Justice assistants. They went through the best practice standard checklist and have gone to operational tune-up training. So they have been trailblazers in a couple of ways. One, by starting, and one by showing people that you actually have to step back and take a look at your practices and change them and adjust them and improve them if you can.
Yeah. Now, our center director, Jason Barris, has a question that I had on my list as well, because I got an email this morning. I spent some time in New Jersey, and they've decriminalized marijuana usage there. So the county prosecutor and the chief of police of a local town were having a town meeting about what they're going to do about this. So Jason's question is, many states are pushing toward legalization of marijuana in some form, but full legalization has not taken place in New Hampshire. Can you comment on proposals to legalize marijuana, especially in relation to the drug court program? Are drug courts especially well suited to address addiction to particular types of drugs, such as opioids, heroin, etc.?
So great question. It doesn't matter what the substance is. If somebody has a substance use disorder that is causing them difficulty in their life and causing them to continue to commit crime and getting them caught up in the system over and over again, that means they're high risk. And what we say in drug court is, it doesn't, I'm not going to take a position one way or the other. That's a policy decision. And it does not matter if marijuana is legal or not legal. It is a substance just like alcohol that we have to deal with in our treatment courts. And the way we do that is with that motivational interviewing. Do you think that using substances is helping you to get where you are, whether it's marijuana or alcohol or heroin? And we struggle with that in drug courts. But the important thing, there's the medical marijuana piece, and that's not as studied as, sort of benzodiazepines for anxiety and opioids for pain. It's not been studied. But what we do in drug court is we say, we're not your doctor. Let us talk to your doctor. You must sign a release. And oftentimes when we talk to the doctor about a person being in drug court, they understand, oh, there's something else I could do besides marijuana. And I could see how marijuana would contribute to the continued thinking around substances. So whether or not marijuana is legal, we have to deal with it because it is a mind-altering substance, and we will continue to deal with it in drug court. And I got to tell you, 90% of the people in felony adult drug court are using many different substances. There isn't anyone who's just using marijuana.
Right. The other, since we are not to the point where we've got them everywhere for everyone. Are there equity questions involved in where they aren't, where people don't have the opportunity to be in a drug court? Are there
Right.
places in that system where certain sectors of society have access to drug courts and
Right.
sectors don't?
That is a very good question. So every county except Sullivan has a drug court. So if you're in a superior court, you have access to a drug court. And that was a question that came up before we got any funding, where we had just 3 drug courts operating.
Right.
People would raise that. And there is actually a Supreme Court opinion that says it is not a violation of equal protection for there to be an available drug court in one county and not another. The equal protection argument would be if all women were not allowed to go to drug court, that would be a violation of equal protection. But it still doesn't make it easier to swallow. And one thing that we do try to do.
And you can disagree with the Supreme Court.
Of course you can, right.
And buy into that notion. I think you're discriminated against in Sullivan County.
Right. They're just last. They're not always right. But so one thing that we do try to do is if you have charges in 2 different counties and you could get into drug court in the county that has it, then we will transfer the case there. So it's a little bit of bootstrapping, but.
Right. Now, I've got one question that's not quite on point, but it is about criminal justice and the question
Sure.
of the privatization of prisons. And is that a helpful or hurtful piece of the puzzle?
So I'm not a corrections expert, but I do know from my good relationship with the Commissioner of Corrections here that the theory behind being against privatization is that our goal is to have as few people incarcerated as possible. We want to be able to help them find their way to a meaningful contribution to society. If you privatize and profit is involved, and the bigger you get, the more money you make, then that sort of is at odds with alternative options to incarceration. So that's what I've heard the corrections
Right.
folks talk about.
But at no point, at no point does a privatized prison get to solicit paying customers.
Right, but they would be less likely to engage in reentry programs or sort of community corrections.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, we're approaching our 6 o'clock hour. Do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Well, I would like to say to anyone who wants to talk to me further about any of these things, just feel free to reach out to get my contact information. I like to be available to anybody in the community. And what I am thrilled about is the opportunity to talk to engaged, passionate community members about these issues. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Great. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Rockefeller Center, thank you for your time. And I look forward to having you engage with my students in the fall. Thank you.
Yes, it'll be great.
Joanne?
Well, thank you. That was, thank you both, Judge Nadeau and Professor Scheiko. Thanks for bringing that timely topic to the Dartmouth community. I'm sure we're going to ruminate on everything that was discussed for days to come. There's a lot to think about. So thank you all. Thank you all to everyone in the audience. I want to mention that next week, we will be holding our last Rocky Watch event of the term. It's hard to believe that the term's gone by this quickly. And we will be hosting New York Times international correspondent Alyssa Johansson Rubin, who will be discussing fact-based journalism in an age of suspicion. And that event will be hosted by Professor Alexis Jetter. So thank you all for attending tonight, and we hope we see you next Wednesday.